I firmly believe that to hold public office is a responsibility. It's not a piece of personal property. At the forefront of every politician's activity should be a justifiable public purpose, and this point of view, in my opinion, is completely compatible with a lifetime's enthusiasm for the arts, for culture, in particular, for opera and classical music. Let me say a little bit about how I got into all of this. I was a student in Manchester, and what got me interested in classical music was cheap student tickets. And one of the things I intend to stand up for in my little talk today is cheap student tickets. That gave me access to some great things. I went to hear the Halle Orchestra, Manchester's great orchestra, as a student. And yes, I did hear Sir John Barbarolli conduct Dvorak. I was very young, he was getting on a bit. But I also heard Maurice Hansen's conduct Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony with the Halle, conduct Prokofiev's Scythian Suite. And I have to say, for me, as a young man, this was a revelation. At the same time, again through cheap student tickets, I heard Norman Bailey sing in my very first Wagner opera, Die Walküre, again at the theatre on Oxford Road in Manchester. And I heard, for the very first time, Mussorgsky's Boris Godunov. Now, all of this left an indelible impression on me, and you might say that's because you were a very impressionable youngster when you're in your teens, but it was more than that. And the one lasting, abiding memory is of the Kirov Opera and Ballet Company coming all the way to Manchester from St. Petersburg to do vignettes from great Russian artworks. It was a stunning presentation of music and classical art of the very, very highest caliber. And what stays with me still, and this is sort of over 40 years ago now, is a little scene from Mussorgsky's other opera, as people call it, Kovalchina, where Marfa, the principal female character in the opera, tells Lord Golitsyn, Prince Golitsyn, his future. And she does it in a fantastic musical scene where Mussorgsky conjures up this vision of the future. She uses, as people always do in opera, dark arts to tell what's going to happen to him. And she accurately tells his future, and you can hear the music spelling it out. And a little while later, as I examined the rest of the opera, I found out that it all comes true, that it actually tells this story. So I was drawn into all of this. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And as a politician, although I take my public responsibilities very, very seriously indeed, I've always had a very strong commitment to culture, to the arts, to the visual arts, as well as the performing arts. We're dealing with artworks whose significance is international and universal, that can be life-affirming through thought-provoking and challenging, all at the same time. This world heritage has to be treasured and protected, and in saying this, I know I am preaching to the converted, and so I will not talk about the justification for cultural enthusiasm, but about the practical things that public representatives can do, especially in an age of austerity. Now, I say in an age of austerity, these are not new questions. We have always had to make our case for the arts, for culture, and I cannot remember a time when government said, this is an age of prosperity, let us double the arts budget. By and large, they do not say such things, and those of us who see the value of it have to constantly defend the expenditures of public money. The temptation for national governments, and I have to say local governments as well, is to hit arts funding disproportionately. It's a very real temptation for them. In times of retrenchment, all bureaucracies look to their external programs first for funding cuts, if only because it doesn't seem quite so close to home. To the political decision maker, cuts in the cultural budget can seem slightly less painful than other unpalatable alternatives. And I think it is important to pause and reflect on the cumulative effect of such decision making. The culture budget might seem like an easy hit, but assaulted disproportionately and on every front, it's the wrong thing to do. In recognition of this point, our Secretary of State for Culture called for the arts organisations to provide evidence of the value of culture to our economy through demonstrating the economic impact of arts-based organisations as economic drivers for local economies. Now, she's in a different political party to me, but I believe her point is a fair one, but it isn't the case for the arts and cultural activity. The economic development argument is but a part of a much more important and in part subjective argument, such is the prevailing mood today, here in the United Kingdom at least, and probably in the Western world more widely, that I'm not arguing against every publicly funded budget reduction, although I am arguing that the arts and culture budgets should not be hit disproportionately. We need to find new ways to stimulate funding for the cultural and arts sector. This means encouraging wealthy private individuals, large corporations and others who are able to act as sponsors to do so. And in Britain, we should not forget or undervalue or get complacent about the role of the National Lottery as an important patron of the arts. The same point, but in a different way, applies to the BBC. We should make it easy for them to fill this important role as arts sponsors. We should not try and find obstacles to make it harder for them. As public representatives, we should explicitly recognise arts sponsorship as a public good. We should say this. We should take a hard look at how the tax system can incentivise good corporate citizenship, but also think carefully about other forms of recognition. We, as public figures, have a public platform. We have a role as advocates. We set the tone for public debate. More than that, we are community leaders, and we can lead by example, as patron, enthusiast, even as part of the audience. I have more time now that I'm not a government minister, and indeed my party is not in government. I have more time to commit to other things that I think are important. I'm a non-executive director of the Mariinsky Theatre Trust, which is the Anglo-Russian friendship organisation, supporting here in the United Kingdom the work of the Mariinsky Opera and Ballet Company. I'm one of 3 patrons of the Leeds Youth Opera. Leeds is the only city in the north of England that actually has a youth opera. It's a little gem. It's run on a shoestring and kept going by the enthusiasm of local parents and youngsters. It shows that sustained effort, hard work and commitment goes a long way and needs to be allied to a passion for what you're doing. Finally, I'm also a trustee of the Biscuit Factory Foundation, which is the charitable trust associated with the biscuit factory in Newcastle East, and you're going to ask me what that is. It is the largest private art gallery in the country, and none of you would have guessed that the largest private art gallery in the country was going to be in Newcastle in the northeast of England. Probably the most damaging charge that is constantly levelled against the arts, not least when we are discussing budget cuts, is that these things are only for a cultural elite and not for others. This just isn't true. It shouldn't be true. We shouldn't let it become true. Access is important, whether we're discussing museum charges or cut-price tickets for students and young people. I have in my constituency the Live Theatre Company, home to Lee Hall and his plays, The Pitman Painters and Billy Elliot. These are great working class artworks, telling stories that are firmly rooted in their time and communities. In their own different way, both plays tell a story of working class people discovering art in the form of paintings and ballet. East Newcastle is also host to the National Centre for the Children's Book, situated in the heart of the working class community of Baker, and it's a truly wonderful project. It celebrates the works of children's authors. It has exciting interactive experiences for young children. And I just tell you, it is a joy to visit and to see the young children when they've exhausted themselves with the different displays and interactive play items, sitting down and reading. The project has got national recognition. It's just won this year's National Lottery Award for the best education project. And I have to say, as their Member of Parliament, I am very proud of them. Internationally, I think the same argument about the interests of comfortable establishments versus the interests of the poor and underprivileged is sometimes used to criticise any funding for arts and culture. I'm proud of what we in British public life are doing to strive to meet the 0.7% target, the United Nations GDP target for our overseas aid budget, but it is not a zero-sum game. Those who have nothing, who want for food, shelter, clean water, clothing, who fear for their personal safety, deserve our support and help in obtaining these essentials. And it is sometimes argued that in these circumstances, high art and culture is just an indulgence. If you want for clean, unpolluted water, what's the use for classical ballet? If life is a daily struggle for necessities, those of us who can, governments as well as individual citizens, should offer practical help and more besides. High art and culture should be for the poor as well as for the rich. It can inspire, energize, enthuse, broaden horizons and release potential in a way that little else can. We should share and promote the very finest things in life alongside its necessities. And as a subsidiary point, can I just gently point out that rather like sport, high art can also provide an international route for social mobility. Now, I've made my point about accessibility in the context of the poor. I am very conscious of the fact that there is a whole separate speech to be made about gender and the historic exclusion of women because of social circumstances in the developed world as well as the developing world, but for another day. I would like to move to a conclusion the way you invited me to begin, with an acknowledgement of the international, universal, overarching dimension to all of this. I've just come back from viewing what was once the art collection of Robert Walpole, Britain's first Prime Minister. He accumulated great wealth, something Britain's Prime Ministers seem able to do back then in the reign of George I. And he accumulated a great art collection, which was then purchased by the Empress of Russia from his grandson. Catherine the Great brought the whole collection through agents, sight unseen, and for centuries it has been on display in the world's greatest art collection in the Hermitage and elsewhere in Russia. The curators have very kindly lent it to the United Kingdom so that it can be displayed this summer in its original setting, Houghton Hall in Norfolk. The number of viewing days has had to be extended in response to enthusiastic public demand. And the point is this: visiting exhibitions enable other peoples to see artworks of international significance. In the same vein, I applaud the work that is being done at the British Museum with their special exhibitions. At the same point is true for visiting orchestras, opera and ballet companies. As politicians, we should do what we can to facilitate these exchanges, again, rather than putting obstacles in the way. And let me conclude with one final example of what I mean. Last year I went to Cardiff to listen to the Mariinsky Orchestra and soloists perform Mahler's Symphony of 1000 in St David's Hall, which is Cardiff's great new concert hall. The symphony calls for a chorus of young people, and there was a competition throughout Wales for young choristers to come forward. It was oversubscribed, of course. Not only did they have the excitement of taking part in a professional performance of a great artwork with one of the world's greatest orchestras, performing with world-renowned artists under the baton of Maestro Valery Gergiev. I think all of that would have been a marvellous thing for a young person to get to do, but Maestro Gergiev not only spent a lot of time with the young Welsh choristers, He took them all to St. Petersburg, to the home of the Mariinsky, and had them perform the piece in the Mariinsky Theatre in front of a Russian audience. Now that, for me, is what we should be about. An international dimension, a commitment to excellence, and the involvement of others who might, at first, have thought that all of this was not for them. Thank you very much.